Pleasure to be here this afternoon. Do you hear me? Okay, thank you. All right, so starting off, I'd like to greet the honorable ministers, honorable commissioners present, the DG NTDC, honorable gentlemen and women of the press, distinguished tourism professionals and scholars. It's a pleasure to join you here at the 30th anniversary of ATPN. It's also a pleasure to speak on this year's theme of driving economic sustainability through tourism from rhetoric to action. And that seems to be the keyword, action. So 2020 has been quite a year when everything turned on its head, essentially. It's a year that's challenged most of us, but rather than withdraw, we have decided to look inwards to domestic tourism. Across the many discussions we've had on this subject, we've looked inwards, okay? It's been a year that followed many years of pouring business into travel to many parts of the world, to see the beauty of Cape Town, to visit Dubai, to enjoy the shopping in London. And from all of those types of trips, it's easy to deduce that the Nigerian tourist has basically been a bargain seeker. Bargain seeking in air travel, bargain seeking in hotels, bargain seeking for venues. But most importantly, you would have observed, having been in the airline business myself, that they seek enough bargains to bring home one suitcase or two to finance their holidays. This reality I've tried to project to people in the sector about the nature of the Nigerian tourists and so on. And I'll be talking about this new inward look towards our own local market. The most important lesson of 2020 being that we look inwards to whatever opportunities there are in the marketplace. It leads to a famous Nigerian saying that all of the things we've been looking for in Sokoto, we find in our Shokoto. So moving on to my tourists, to my presentation, I'll be talking about creating access to tourist sites and harnessing the AOPA window. To introduce AOPA, first of all, AOPA, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Nigeria, is a member of the International Council of Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, IOPA, which is the largest aircraft owners and pilots association in the world. The IAOPA is a non-profit federation of 73 autonomous, non-governmental, national general aviation organizations. It represents constituent members of over 470,000 pilots who fly general aviation aircraft that run in the hundreds of thousands for business and personal transportation. ICAO defines general aviation as all civil aviation operations that are non-scheduled and not for remuneration or hire. And IAOPA has represented general aviation for over 50 years. So today I'll be speaking on the role of general aviation, that's aircraft and pilots, that the role they can play in making tourist sites available in Nigeria, or basically accessible. So this discussion is a sub-theme of the main theme, which is driving economic sustainability through tourism from rhetoric to action. And 3 points arise directly from this theme and a further one from my sub-theme, which are the economics, tourism as an opportunity, taking action, and the role that general aviation can play. So I had some figures I shared with ATPN earlier, but I had the opportunity to listen to Gloria's presentation and quickly adjusted my numbers because what's out there in the marketplace is figures from 2015, but I'm glad to have some 2020 numbers. So basically, we know that tourism from the earlier presentation provides 10.3% of the world jobs, which is 330 million jobs, which I had previously as from the 2015 figure as 260 million jobs. It represents 10.3% of the world GDP, about 6 trillion, 5.8% of world exports, 4.5% of world investment. So, 1 in 10 jobs are in tourism and 1/4 of all new jobs created are in tourism. And I have a chart here that shows the impact and performance for 2019, which my slide is always available post the presentation. So talking from global to Africa, I had originally 2015 figures from the World Bank, which said there were Africa received $54 billion in official assistance, but tourism provided 39.2 billion domestic tourism. So clearly we can see that tourism is very impactful in the region. Moving from Africa to sub-Saharan Africa, as we move closer to Nigeria, tourism has created millions of jobs, brings a lot of economic benefits, and it has been developed successfully, if it is developed successfully. And that's the challenge of taking some of the things we talk about and bringing them into action. So I share some data on the impacts to SSA economies. In East Africa, tourism contributes 5.5%, followed by South Africa, 3.4%, West Africa, only 2%, basically, and 1.7% in Central Africa. It provides for almost half of all service exports in SSA. South Africa receives 40% of its tourist receipts, 13 billion. East Africa, which is Kenya, Mauritius, and Tanzania, receive 1 billion in tourist receipts. And bringing it closer to market, Nigeria, West Africa, Ghana and Nigeria are the biggest tourism earners, accounting for 60% of all sub-regional receipts, which in West Africa. So, SSA countries by development tourism index, you will see this. A lot of time has been spent previously, but you see all of that. Well, Nigeria falls into what is called lower middle income for potentially initiating, meaning that there's a lot of potential, and that's really the product of a lot of talk and very little action. Tourism spending in Nigeria went from $81 million in 1998 to almost $1 billion in 2008, but 2018, almost $2 billion. But you observe that the percentage between 1998 and 2018 as percentage of exports are very similar. So the growth is high in volume, but very minimal in impact. So in 2018, tourism and travel contributed 5% to Nigeria's GDP and 1.6% of total employment. So if you compare that number and look at the global numbers, you see that there's tremendous opportunity for growth that exists if properly harnessed. So tourism, why tourism? And I talk about that. Basically, tourism is travel for business or pleasure. And it is, as has been said by previous speakers, a key economic driver and opportunity for job creation. The travel and tourism industries continue to grow at this rate faster than GDP. We've seen that in previous charts. Worldwide overnight travels exceeded 1.2 billion pre-COVID. We know the numbers are down, and we've talked about recovery. It has increased 25% over the past 5 years. Total annual economic impact, 7.2 trillion. And as we come out of this as we enter this post-COVID period, we're looking at potentially a reset. Why tourism? We've talked about this countless times. It brings about economic transformation, creates many jobs, particularly beneficial to remote regions. And I liked the presentation about Gloria and the Mexican example, and it's very similar to the opportunities that exist for us in Nigeria. And I use Bayelsa as an example because over the last few years, I have consulted to the state government on tourism. So when we move from adopting the preservation or conservation of sea life, for example, rather than eating the fish, we see the opportunity to create greater tourism in those markets. It accelerates reforms, it triggers infrastructure improvements. Naturally, as the tourists start to come, you start to build these hotels and housing and all kinds of things, as you see across airports, etc. It increases domestic consumption, diversifies exports, empowers young men and women, and marginalized population, and stimulates cultural heritage and environmental conservation, as the professor had previously spoken. So we look at the impact model, the sectors. We see the sectors affected transportation, entertainment, recreation, retail, food, beverage, accommodation, which bring about direct and induced impacts. And the effect is the production, jobs, wages, and of course, to benefit to the state are taxes. So this slide talks about the transformative effect of tourism. And I've presented this before. In Thailand, tourism barely existed in 1960. By 2010, it had employed 15 to 20% of the workforce. The Dominican Republic had 1,600 rooms in 1972. And in 2011, it had 66,000. See the growth. Tourism accounted for 31% of exports of goods and services and 7.9% of GDP in 2011. Bali in Indonesia received 95,000 tourists in 1973, and by 2010, 1.96 million, who spent $1.9 billion. Cancun in Mexico grew from an uninhabited peninsula resorts in the world in 35 years. Egypt from 1990 to 2005 grew from 2.9 million to 8.6 million tourists. Okay, and many examples. And how does tourism affect the entire ecosystem? And I show the impact for hospitals, farms, sports arenas, schools, the raw material inputs, and all of those things. Okay, so we know what tourism can do from this previous slides, from the previous speakers, and we know that Nigeria itself has tremendous tourism potential. And so I say Nigeria has many beautiful and exciting tourist sites. The challenge remains, and that's what my theme is, that they're mostly inaccessible. Whether it be Obudu Kadu Ranch, I use that example. I was in Calabar for a wedding, and I had an off day. I arrived early, and I said, "Oh, can I just have a taxi and go to Obudu?" And the hotel staff laughed at me that Obudu is not something you just get up and go. You have to make arrangements even within Calabar. And to some people, may actually be better to come from Benue. We have Ikogosi Warm Springs in Ekiti, lovely place to have fun. I have a picture here, great pool, but it's 4 hours from Lagos and maybe 2 hours from another location. Okay, we have Lumiere Waterfalls. Those that have been there will tell you what a wonderful spiritual place, wonderful, unimaginable place, but essentially inaccessible. We have in Honoi Palace, I said Palance there, my mistake. We have a beautiful location in Kogi, accessible from Abuja after a few hours trip. We have Yusuf Fari sand dunes in Jigawa. And so if we have such a lovely place, why do we go look at sand dunes in Dubai? You know, the experience is local, we conserve currency, etc. Okay, we have the Panzulus Gorilla Sanctuary, we have dolphins and whales in Bielsa, but some of us want to go to Sao Tome to experience the same thing. We have wonderful and beautiful landscape in Benue, but the problem remains one of inaccessibility. So, my point is that aviation is a key tool in bridging this. And there's an ongoing debate in the country whether we need more airports, whether every state should have an airport. And these are all issues that are tied to one another, and people have to look at them in that regard. But general aviation, the sector which my association operates in, I give a description as smaller aircrafts that can get into. The trick about all of these locations I told you is that they have airfields. They have smaller airports that can be accessed by helicopters, can be accessed by smaller airplanes, and those are what we call general aviation. And I think that if we can somehow tie the growth of the general aviation sector to the overall tourism schema, we can make a lot of these places accessible, okay? And so these are airplanes between 4 and 30 seats. And for example, if you look at Kenya, one of the reasons Kenyan tourism is so successful is the use of general aviation, the use of Cessna caravans, 19-seater, 10-seater, etc. And so these are the things, these are the areas that we say we need to look at in terms of developing our tourism sector. And I show some pictures, you know, we may not have, it may not have been so obvious about the role general aviation plays, but when you go to Dubai and you jump out of an airplane, that's general aviation. When you take the tour around Dubai, that's general aviation. Emirates gets you there, but you need another mode of transportation to completely experience the islands, the various opportunities. And down there, of course, if you can take a helicopter to the beach and have a great grand time with your family. That's all part of the role that can play. And so the issue is to talk the talk or walk the talk rather than talk the walk. And so the point is that as tour operators, we need to look at the role we can play as operators of general aviation or access to general aviation assets that are very plentiful and available to open up a lot of these places we talk about as being good to go to, but are very difficult to get to and very difficult to come from. And so my point is that general aviation can open up all of these potential sites. And I said, ask me how. So thank you very much.